Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at Chapter 2. And we're going to be talking obviously about economics and banking and just some very basic things about economics and banking. And you'll get more economics when you take the economics class. If you're working on your transfer degree, obviously they're going to ask you to take the economics class for your business major. And it's a good idea to take that here at Ohlone when you get to that. But in this class, we just talk some basic terms here. Those terms will help us when we get into some of the later chapters. Okay, so let's just go ahead. Some of the learning objectives, as we've said, some basic terminology regarding economics with a focus here on the supply and demand. Okay, we're actually going to understand how the supply and demand curves work, and we're going to practice with some questions. Nothing numeric on those, but just more visual to see what supply and demand curve is all about for us. We're also going to understand something about economic indicators, including something called gross domestic product, which is pretty much internationally recognized as a key economic indicator, as is the unemployment rate. So we'll talk about some of that. We'll talk about the business cycle, and then we're going to talk about banking. And when we get into the banking, that's really talking about the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve banks, which are sort of like a quasi-government organization that sets monetary policy through different types of activities, etc. So we'll get into all of these things. Again, primarily definitional here for us. So when we talk about different types of economies, there are things called planned economy. A planned economy is basically where the government controls the inputs to the economy, really goes ahead and makes all the decisions as opposed to private companies, private individuals. Market economies, pretty much the U.S. is a good example of a market economy, although there are some that are more pure market economies. And then you have mixed, where you have some planned activities and you have some market factors as well. Okay, so you take a look at some of the examples here, and you can see countries that fall into these different areas of planned systems. North Korea, Cuba, obviously being very planned economies and more towards the communism side type of government. Capitalism side tends to be more your market economies. You can see the U.S., but then they talk about in Hong Kong, they're calling that out as a little separate country from China, I guess, because there's some laws, et cetera, that might be a little different in China than Hong Kong. And then you can see some in the middle here that are considered socialism, where you have a mixture of our planned systems and our free market systems. Okay. Now, when we talk about economics, we tend to talk about them economics in two major categories. One is macroeconomics, and the things that we're going to talk about in this chapter really pertain to macroeconomics, which is just the overall economics of a country. Okay, and that's where we're going to be talking about things about like gross domestic product, some of those indicators. That's macroeconomics. Microeconomics, which we're not going to get much into in this chapter, really talks more about the economics affecting any one company. For example, the concept of marginal utility. Marginal utility says that you can only use so many factors of input before you have the law of diminishing returns, right? So if you're trying to build a house, you have one guy building a house, that's going to, not be the most efficient or effective way to build the house. You add two guys, that's better. You add three, that's even better. If you add 20 guys, now they're bumping into each other, right? And the law of margin utility starts to kick in when you add that one more person or that one more input. Remember, we talked about the factors of production last time. That one more input causes the productivity to go down. These are the type of things that we think about in microeconomics because they tend to be how you would actually run a company and the factors, economic factors associated with that. With macroeconomics, we're talking much more about the overall economy. So we're going to talk about things like gross domestic product, not ghost domestic product, but gross domestic product. Things like the unemployment rate, etc. And we'll get into some of those. And these are the type of things that you hear about on the news all the time. You'll hear, okay, now for the latest business report or something, and they'll talk about what's going on with GDP, etc. And these things tend to be, the macroeconomics tend to be politicized a lot. So this time of year, or this time of, when we're getting ready to elect the president is where you start hearing a lot more of this stuff. Maybe we should have a requirement that we watch one of the debates and see if we understand any of the economic terminology that'll be thrown about in those. And they tend to try to make their case by some of the terms that they throw out. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on macroeconomics in this chapter, which is the study of the overall economy. So let's take a look in this question. Again, remember, guys, if you get confused and you're like, well, why is John starting with number 4? Where it happened to 1 through 3? I keep the original number in the problem from the test bank so that I know where I grabbed that question from. So when I'm putting together your exam, I know where to go back and see where we have pulled questions from. But this one is asking us in a free market economy what happens, and instead of the government running things like we see in A, it is what? It is individuals and private firms, right? And that tended to be the U.S. They mentioned Hong Kong in that example, sort of at the extreme end. At the other end, we have what? We have the planned economies. They mentioned Cuba, etc. Now, with Cuba, I look at that and I ask the question, well, how much longer is that going to go on with the idea that Cuba is now opening up for trade and that sort of thing with the U.S.? And I would think maybe over time you'll see that swing more towards the market side, or at least more towards the middle of a mixed economy. But right now, Cuba is seen as more over on the plan side. Okay, good. Take a look at number 6 here from the test bank. A planned economy is one in which the government runs things. So basically the same choices here. We just focused from a market to a planned. Okay, I think maybe I picked this one because the person's name was John. I don't know, but it's an employee of a car manufacturer, and he came into work and found out that the government stopped the operations. Well, if that's the case, then we're probably talking about what? Planned economy, if the government is the one that's coming in and making those kinds of decisions, right? We've said that's a planned economy. Okay. All right, good. Let's go ahead then and talk about our notion of our currency, our market price, and how supply and demand will get into market price. And we're going to talk more about banking here, and you can obviously recognize the currency. What does that mean? What does that D right there mean? Does your money have that letter on it? Huh? It has a letter. It may not be D. You will have a letter either A through L on your money. And A through L is the first 12 letters of the alphabet, and that corresponds to the Federal Reserve banks. Okay, so those are, and it says right on their Federal Reserve note. And there was a time where the currency was backed by gold, And so you had across the country, and the L being the last one, that's the San Francisco Federal Reserve. And if you look at a map, we're going to look at it later, you'll see how the letters get larger, if letters are considered larger, or the numbers get larger as you go across west. And there was a time where it was thought that you would be able to go back to the Federal Reserve Bank and say, okay, take your note back and give me gold in exchange. Well, the Federal Reserve banks don't do that anymore. We've been off the gold standard for some time, but the tradition has maintained that those are notes of that bank, and presumably you could take them back and redeem them. But these days, if you took them back to redeem them, they'd give you what? They'd give you cash back. It could be exchanging cash for cash. But they still have a little bit of gold in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which is number 2. For some reason, New York is 2 and Boston is 1. And I can't explain to you how they decided that. Who came up with this whole system, by the way? I asked this question because it's kind of a famous guy now. For years, nobody ever even knew who the person was that came up with the whole financial system of the United States. But now he's getting a lot more recognition. He is. It's on the $10 bill. No? Alexander Hamilton. You've heard of the Broadway play Hamilton? Okay. He's the guy that came up with all this. If you look on your 10, in fact, they were talking about taking him off of the 10 and putting Harriet Tubman on the 10 instead, and then they had some problem in that people say, well, we want to keep Alexander Hamilton on the 10, and so now they're going to share the 20 with Andrew Jackson and Harriet Tubman. But anyway, those letters on there correspond to the different reserve banks, but these days it really doesn't make much difference. It's more of a tradition than anything. Okay, but we're going to talk more about the Federal Reserve System, but that's obviously a currency system that we're in. We're not in a barter system. Barter is what? I give you some soap and you give me some fruit or whatever it is. I don't know, but we exchange thing for thing, right? Okay, good. Supply and demand. That's going to be the primary thing we're going to focus on. Supply is what sellers are willing to provide, and it's going to be based on price. The higher the price, the more the sellers are willing to supply. Demand is the desire to acquire a product, and we're going to see that the lower the price, the greater the demand. And we're going to look for where that supply and that demand intersect, and that's going to be considered market equilibrium. That's going to be considered our market price. Okay? So you take a look, and they show us the supply curve here. Okay? And the law of supply says that the higher the price, the more that will be supplied, that will be offered. Okay? So you notice here that when we're at these higher prices, more people want to get into the market and provide this product, right? And that makes sense. The more the money you can make, the more enthusiastic you are going to be about going into a particular business, right? Okay. Now you come over and we talk about the demand, and the demand curve works the other way, which is what? The lower the price, the more people want to buy that product. So if you heard that you could get an ice cream cone at Baskin-Robbins for a nickel, everybody would be lined up out the door to try to get those ice cream cones, right? Now, by the same time, we're saying, well, if all I can do is get a nickel for an ice cream cone, I'm not going into the ice cream business, so supply is going to be pulled back as that price comes down, right? Okay, so what we look at is our market price. Oh, sorry guys, I stuck this slide in there. This is a little different from what the text has. I wanted to, and we're not going to have this on the test, but I wanted to get this idea out there of inelastic demand, because you look and there are some items that we're going to have no matter what the price. Can you think of any? Yes, sir. Food, water is the classic example, right? Okay, at some point, you will give up everything you have for what? For a drink of water if it comes down to dying of thirst versus, giving up something of value. And so, notice how steep this is, and they're saying that at even the highest price, there's still a demand for some quantity, right? Now, it's not perfectly elastic. Something that's perfectly elastic would be just like this, right? Regardless of the price, there's going to be the same demand. Very few things work that way, but if we were down to the last drop of water, then yes, we'd have a straight line. When we, at any price, we'll go ahead and we'll purchase that water. So if this was proposing water here and showing water, I suppose this would be the drinking water near the top here, and down here we'd have what? We'd have the water that you use to wash your car or something, right? And what happens now if you use more water than what the state wants you to, they're going to charge you a penalty for that, right? So we even see with water, there's some elasticity to the demand for that as people start to pull back on the use to, save money, right? Okay, so again, this idea of elasticity of demand, water I think would have a somewhat inelastic demand. Some people would argue that healthcare has an inelastic demand, okay, that at some level you're going to do what? You're going to need some amount of health care, and you would be willing to pay anything if you're on your last, chance and you're on your deathbed. Hey, you'll give up all you own for medical treatment, right? And so some people say medical treatment has a somewhat inelastic demand. When you start getting into products, services that start to have an inelastic demand, then that's when you start to see, even in a market economy, that's where you start to see the government coming in and regulating, right? So who provides you with water? The government does at the end of the day. The city is going to provide you with water, right? When I say provide, you have to pay for it, but they're the ones that control that. Utilities, PG&E, has a somewhat inelastic demand. There's regulation from the government there. Healthcare, you're seeing more now in the U.S. regulation. Some countries, healthcare is entirely regulated by the government, right? Because of this notion of this inelasticity for the exam, not the exam, the demand, and the idea that we're not going to let people just sit there and die of thirst because they don't have water, right? Okay, so we start to see more regulation for some of these things that have an inelastic demand. Okay, but just taking a look now, where we have what? We have the idea of our coffee company, I guess, here. And what? If she's going to get a low price for the coffee, she's not going to provide as much. If what? At a higher price, she'll provide more, but nobody will buy it at that price, right? And then what? And so we have people that are willing to pay a certain amount for coffee. Other people are willing to pay more for coffee. And so what happens? The market equilibrium is right here, where the amount that someone is willing to purchase at a given price meets what individuals are willing to sell at a given price. And we call that our market price. That's going to be our market price. And presumably, when you're right here at that, that point of intersection, right at that point, there should be 0 items left for anybody to purchase, and no one is willing to supply any more at that point in time. Okay, so if you're sitting in your back here, where demand is more than your supply, are we going to have a surplus or a shortage, do you think? That's going to be what? Don't everybody answer at once. Now, I know it's early to be talking about this kind of stuff. That's going to be the shortage, because there's more people demanding this product than is going to be offered at those prices, right? Okay, that's why you have a line out the door waiting for cinnamon rolls or something, because the price is good and the person isn't willing to provide any more, right? Okay. How about right here? Do we have a what do we have here? A surplus right in there? We've got a surplus because what? You got all kinds of people crowding the market wanting to provide this product because they think they can sell it for this, but nobody buys it, right? And so the idea is, the economic theory is that eventually we will trend towards that market price, right? And there might be some back and forth in the market until we find that equilibrium. Okay? Any question on that? Okay, good. So it's just some basic economic theory. And, this is something pretty good that you can be, hanging around with your friends. You want to impress your friends, right? And you're going somewhere and you see a long line of people waiting for stuff and you must say, there's no market equilibrium there. Look they must have a shortage there, right? I bet you the price of that stuff's going to go up because right now the demand is more than the supply, etc. Right? And your friends are going to say, okay, you know what? Be quiet and just go back to the way you used to be, right? Because no one's going to understand what you're talking about. So once you start looking at this kind of stuff and getting into it, it gets a little contagious, right? Okay, all right, so let's just go ahead then and see what some detriments of supply are. Technological changes, for example, okay, is going to be a detriment of supply. No one's going to be willing to supply something if the technology now has gone past that particular item. I have a little problem with my computer. It has trouble accessing the internet, and so they told me that I could buy this little thing that you put in the USB, and it somehow works like an antenna, I guess, to get better Wi-Fi access, because whatever the Wi-Fi access thing that's inside my computer isn't picking up the signal, right? So I said, okay, great, that's what I need. So I get the thing and I look at it yesterday, I open it up. Guess what's inside there that I have to use before I can use this thing? A CD. They have a CD in there that they're sitting there saying, okay, you have to put that in first. And I'm like, you're kidding me. Where's the CD on this computer? I don't have a CD, that right? That's old technology, right? So if you're a compact disc maker, you're not going to want to supply that product anymore. You're going to start moving into, well, I'm going to be a USB manufacturer or something, right? And you'll start to put more of your resources towards that. So the supply of CDs starts to pull back, doesn't it? Okay, so technological advances will do that. Change in the resource price. What happens? Whatever you have to put in to make your product, the raw materials you use to make your product, if the price goes down, you're willing to supply more at lower prices, right? If the price goes up because there's some sort of shortage or something, then you're going to raise the prices. You see this sometimes when there's a freeze in Florida, and all of a sudden everybody starts saying, oh, the price of oranges are going to go up because, or price of orange juice is going to go up because what? There's a problem with the resources that are used to make oranges. Okay, I mean to make orange juice, the oranges. Price expectations. If there's a feeling that prices are going to go up, even if they haven't gone up yet, people are going to start to want to get into that market. Believe that prices are going down, people are going to start to pull out of that market, right? Obviously, the number of suppliers, as we get more crowded in that particular market, more and more people try to get into it, we're going to have the situation where all of a sudden, we're going to have people that are willing to pull back on the supply because they're saying, I'm not getting in to that market because it's getting too crowded and there's going to be too many suppliers. Price of substitute goods. You could go back to the CD example again. I was looking at something a while back, and it said the number one selling compact disc, music compact disc, was Barry Manilow's Greatest Hits. Okay. Now look, this is not really the place to sleep. Okay, so if you're a little bit sleepy, you may want to go take a nap somewhere. But in this class, you should really, try to stay awake. Okay, I know it's not the most interesting thing in the world, but when I start seeing rapid eye movement, I have to say something. It's human to fall asleep. It's my job to wake you up. Okay, all right. So what happens? I saw this thing that said the number one compact disc was Barry Manilow's greatest hits. Do you guys know who Barry Manilow is? He was this guy that was, a singer back in the 70s. Okay, and so what happens? I'm looking at that, I'm saying, why would his CD be the number one selling CD? And then I realized that it's probably a bunch of older people that like Barry Manilow music that still use CDs as opposed to using their iPod or their iPhone, I guess now, to listen to music on, right? So that was the number one selling CD. So what happens? As time goes on, the demand for CDs goes down. What happens? The willingness to supply CDs diminishes, and so substitute goods like using an iPod instead of a CD player or whatever would impact the price of the price of a compact of an iPhone comes down, the willingness to demand to provide the substitute good, the CD player, will be detriment to supply. Detriment to supply. Okay, so basically what you see here is things that will shift up or down the supply curve. So just go back to that CD example that we were using, where we're seeing that as the iPhone and the iPod and Apple, takes over the music industry with all of their products, that's going to shift what? This would be CDs right here would shift from here when CD was all the rage, right? And it comes back now, and so there has been a decrease in the demand because there is this what? There is this substitute good now. We have the iPod. So for our CDs, nobody is willing to purchase those at these higher prices. So notice the price is coming down for CDs, and eventually nobody will supply them either, right? At these prices. So these are good examples of detriments to supply. They talk about substitute goods here, iPods for CDs. One of the things that the government has looked at lately, the federal government, and they've come under some criticism, is they have started to look at when they think about prices and what they should be providing, say, for a cost of living adjustment for Social Security and that sort of thing. They are now starting to bring in this notion of substitute goods. Okay, so if they're saying, well, here's a basket of goods that somebody would need to buy, here's the relative prices for that, so we should increase somebody's Social Security. They didn't do this in the past. Now they'll say, well, look, if the price of salami is going up, somebody will eventually move to bologna, right? Maybe this whole thing is bologna, right? So we'll eventually move to bologna, and so we're going to go ahead and consider the option of substituting salami for bologna, and we're going to say that prices aren't going up nearly as quickly as opposed to just keeping in our basket of goods the salami. So substitute goods are really looking at what you can substitute one for the other, the iPod for the CD for the iPod, salami for bologna. How about complementary goods? Complementary goods. Complementary goods are things that go hand in hand. If you buy one, you buy the other. Okay. What's any example, thoughts on example of complementary good? If you buy one, you're probably going to buy the other. Peanut butter and jelly, good. That's a real good one, right? Peanut butter and jelly are good complementary goods. When you say that, I remember when I was a kid, they had this peanut butter, but it had jelly swirls in it. Okay, but those are probably complementary goods, peanut butter and jelly. What else? The charger and the phone itself. Yeah, okay, that's going to be a good complementary good. The cases. The cell phone and the earphones. Good. These are really good examples, guys. Yeah. Um, iTunes and the iPhone, right? Or the iPod, right? You use one, you're probably going to use maybe not iTunes, but something to get the music on there, right? Okay, so good. These are all good examples of complementary goods. How about change in income levels? What do you think is going to happen? Is that going to shift this demand curve up or down? This way or that way? When I say shift the demand curve up, I mean move it this way. When I say move the demand curve down, I mean this way. So what do you think increase in income level is going to do? Is it going to move it this way or is it going to move it this way? Huh? It should move it up or down? It's going to move it up, right? It's going to move it this way here on the chart because what? Hey, now I got a little extra money, I'm willing to pay a little more for something that I wasn't willing to pay for before, right? If you're not making a lot of money, what are you doing? You're always turning all the lights off in the house. Leave the lights. You start making a little bit more. Well, let's sleep with the lights on. Just leave it on. That's okay. Don't worry about it, right? Okay. Oh, that's all right. Don't worry about it. Just get as much of that stuff that you need at the store. If we don't use it all, that's okay. We'll just throw it away. Right? No, you guys don't do that? Okay. All right. You're still in that stage where like every little penny counts, right? So you're sitting there and your demand is shifted back, isn't it? Okay. But you can shift that thing up as you'll see. You'll see what I'm talking about. Okay. Population changes can shift these. Okay. Obviously, we get a lot more population, more people fighting for fewer goods. That could shift the demand curve. Okay. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at a couple of questions that understand our help to test our understanding of supply and demand. The amount of product or service that is available for purchase at any given price is going to be our supply curve, right? The amount, and the key word in this question is the amount that is what? That is available. That's talking about the supply, isn't it? Hey, are you available? Can you supply yourself to me? Right? Okay. Okay, good. What happens? Let's take a look at this next one. May's Country Kitchen sells out her cinnamon rolls before 8:30. She sells them out, so there was more demand than there was supply, so we had a shortage of cinnamon rolls, didn't we? Okay, so what happens? The customers ask her to make more. The next day, May makes an additional 2 dozen cinnamon rolls, raises the price of an individual roll by 50 cents. She sells all but one. Look, guys, we don't expect this thing to be perfect at 0. You're going to have a little bit of back and forth around 0. Okay, it's, this is a theory that we're talking about. But if she gets pretty close to 0, she only has 1, then she has found her market price, hasn't she? Has she found her market price? Okay, supply is meeting demand. Okay, now, they're talking about this being observed in 1 day's time. Of course, that's not how it works. What do we have? We have some time back and forth. We find that equilibrium. That lasts for a while. Then we have shift in income levels that move those demand curves back and forth. We have technology that moves those supply curves up and down. And so this whole process is what we're calling our macroeconomics, and in macroeconomics the workings of the market, right? The economies of the market. Okay, good. How about this one? Prices become higher when a unique, highly desirable item is auctioned because the demand is higher than the supply. So we're in that shortage area, and if it's an item that's unique, you can't produce more because that's the only one of that thing, right? So what's going to happen? Prices have to go up at that point, right? Okay. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at this one. Supply curve illustrates the effect of price on quantity. So remember, we had price on the y-axis. We had quantity on the x-axis. And so what happens? With our supply curve, we're willing to supply more as the prices are higher, right? Okay. Okay, good. Take a look at this one then, which is the demand curve illustrates what? The effect of price on quantity demanded. And again, price, quantity. I'm not sure I like where I wrote the label for price. Let's just write that over here. And what happens? The lower the price, the more the quantity demanded, right? Okay. I might show you a question on the exam. If I were to just show you this and ask you what type of curve that was, would you be able to tell me that's a demand curve? Right? If I show you what? If I show you something like this, you should be able to tell me that this is what? That this is a supply curve, right? If I were to show you that. And this would be what? Market equilibrium. This would be a surplus. This would be what? This would be a shortage, right? Okay. Okay, good. All right, so let's just go ahead and here we go with the example. iPods and I guess iPods. Do they still have iPods? I don't think so, right? Do they? They still have them? They call them iPods? Does anyone buy them? I don't know who buys them, but anyway, iPods and iTunes are what? Complementary goods, right? Okay, good. All right, let's talk about degrees of competition, okay? And do you guys still play the game Monopoly? Is that still a game? Yeah, every now and then. Okay, what do you play it on the computer now, or is it still a board game? Huh? You haven't played it? Oh, you have a board one. Yeah, you'd have to guess have a board because how would you have the currency and all that, right? I mean, what's the fun if you don't have the bank with all that different colored money and you get to be the banker so when your brother's not looking you can take some money out of the bank, right? Okay, that's half the fun of the game, isn't it? Okay, so what happens? Monopoly is not just a board game. It is an economic term that describes when there is one supplier for a particular product, okay? Think of an example. One supplier for a particular product. Where do you get your electricity from? PG&E. Where do you get your electricity from? Your electricity from AT&T?
Oh, sorry, no, PG&E, I'm so sorry.
PG&E. Where do you get your electricity from? Where do you get yours from? Okay, one supplier for that particular product. So PG&E has a monopoly, at least in this area, when it comes to what? When it comes to providing power, right? And so PG&E is a monopoly. You have one supplier. When you have a monopoly like that, you start to get regulation. They're either going to break that monopoly up, or they're going to go ahead and regulate them. One or the other is going to happen. For example, you used to have just one company that would provide oil. That company was called Standard Oil. It was started by Rockefeller, and he basically would squeeze everyone else out of the market so that he became the one company that was providing that. The government came in and they broke that up and they said, no, you can't have just one company providing the goods across the country. They call that the Federal Trade Commission is the entity that would regulate that and break up a monopoly. Okay. Um, AT&T, somebody mentioned? AT&T had a monopoly at one point in time, which was what? What does AT&T do now? Anyone here have an AT&T cell phone? No? Okay. So at one point in time, what happened? AT&T was the only way you could get phone service in the United States. And so what did they do? They broke them up because you can't have just one company providing something like phone service. And it was interesting that from the time where they broke them up, that's when you started seeing the growth in all the different types of phones that are available. I think that in part helped to increase competition, helped to get, well, look, my phone, I don't have to have it hooked to the wall, whatever, right? And so you started getting more and more advancement with the phones, okay? So these are monopolies. Duopoly is two companies. I couldn't think of one. I couldn't think of an example in the U.S. where we have a duopoly where I could just come off the top of my head of two companies. Anyone got an example? I kept thinking and I just couldn't come up with it. And I even Googled it and I didn't see anything duopoly in the United States. Okay. Oligopoly is pretty easy. Anyone got an example of oligopoly? Yeah, I would say somewhat. The phone, we only have what, a few number of suppliers. I would think that. Um, Go ahead.
Like you got like Verizon, Sprint, Metro, and then AT. You could make a small list of.
You could, yeah, very good point. Yeah, you could make a small list of them, right? Oil companies, gas, right? There isn't that many of them, huh? Yeah, I mean, it's not like, there's a different one every time you turn around, right? Okay. Now, sometimes we'll get into these discussions going back, and I was trying to think of duopolies before. Sounds like some sort of song or something. Duop. Okay, so when we talk about duopolies here, I was trying to think of them, and was thinking for a minute, satellite radio. You had Sirius and you had XM, right? Were the two providers of satellite radio. But the issue that I have there is what? You don't have to have satellite radio. You can have what they call, I forget what they call it when it's just regular radio. Terrestrial radio is regular radio. You could have that as another option for your radio listening pleasures. You can have what? You can have podcasts now that would replace listening to radio that is, flying through the air at any point in time, right? Cable, you can get radio stations on there. So that's why I didn't mention them as a duopoly. So it's not just, that particular product of satellite radio, but what radio listening, where you could start to point to that there's a bunch of different opportunities there. That's why I couldn't think of a duopoly. And so, but with oligopolies, some of the examples we gave, if you want phone service, you're going to one of those providers, right? If you want gas, you're going to go to one of those providers. And it's not like you can say, well, okay, well, maybe though is what? A company like you start having more of these electric cars like Tesla and some of those have, then what? Then you may start to have, you may be able to look at the gas stations as not having, the oil producers as not having quite the oligopolist effect that they have on the economy. Okay. Okay, good. Monopolistic competition. Many buyers and sellers, little differentiation exists between the products, but there's a perceived difference among consumers. Any ideas there? Um, well, but we have many buyers and sellers, so you can't really have them be in both categories. So yeah, they are kind of the same thing, and they try to make you feel that there's a big difference. It's the new one with Jamie Foxx comes out in the commercial. What's he for, Verizon or something? Or and then there's one with all the balls rolling into the pit to see what kind of coverage you get. Or they show you the map, but they're pretty much the same thing. So they do that, but it's not quite monopolistic competition because I don't think we have the limited we have a limited number of suppliers, and the oligopoly and the phone companies would fall more there. Lots of suppliers, lots of buyers, but they try to differentiate themselves. Example of that one. Beauty products?
Makeup and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's paint. Body paint, whatever, however you want to phrase that. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same stuff. But this one is Maybelline that makes your eyelashes longer or whatever, right? Versus whatever other kind of type of makeup there is. I was thinking too, coffee. Right? Oh, we get all impressed with, oh, this is Starbucks. Oh, this is Pete's. Well, these beans are grown in the perfect weather and all that kind of stuff. Or you could get Folgers. Well, we have the Folger crystals that make the coffee a little bit better. They go on and on. At the end of the day, it's bitter beans that we're sitting there and grinding up and drinking, right? Okay. What do they drink in England? Tea. Okay, so in England you have tea. Now I don't know. Do they go through all that in England with the tea? Anybody know the different? Oh, this is that kind of tea versus this kind of tea. I don't know that they're quite as sensitive to the advertising, etc., as we are in the U.S. Right? Perfect competition. Many buyers and sellers, virtually identical products. No barriers to market entry. How about oranges? Right? I mean, what's the difference between the orange that you pick off a tree and the orange that you buy in the store? Now, they'll do different things to try to make them different, to try to make it more up into monopolistic competition, but they're more towards the what? Perfect competition end of the scheme there, aren't they? Okay, and we're not saying that every orange is all the way down here, like they have these sun-kissed oranges, and they tell you that the sun-kissed oranges are, have the navel orange, so that's somehow better than the other type of orange because it doesn't have the seeds in it. Or you'll see advertising where they show the farmer out there at 3 in the morning watering the oranges or something, so you think, oh wow, must be the really good oranges, right? Okay. The best lemons. Anybody ever look at lemons? The best lemons are these Meyer lemons, and they want to charge you $1 a pop for those lemons. Okay, they want to charge you $1 a pop for those lemons. Those lemons grow in my backyard. I have a lemon tree in my backyard that grows that lemon. And mine is better, in fact, for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe because it's in my backyard. But again, now I'm trying to, so I'll sell you the lemons for 80 cents a pop, right? So now I'm starting to differentiate them, right? But these sorts of things would be more perfect competition if there's not a whole lot of distinction between them. Yes, sir. With monopolistic, there's a perceived difference, okay, the different types of coffee, etc. With perfect, as you start to move more towards perfect competition, there's not as much perceived difference, right? So picture yourself in the coffee aisle at the store. You see all of these different coffees, and there's a perceived, oh no, we got to have Folgers versus Sanka or something like that. I don't know, U-Band, whatever that is. Versus when you go into the produce department, go ahead, tell me your favorite orange producer. Right, you really, and again, my point being that they try to push themselves up as much as they can to the top of the perfect competition, heading towards monopolistic. But they're probably more in the perfect competition range. But that doesn't. There's no law that says they can't try to put themselves up towards that monopolistic end of the scale. But they're down in perfect competition. And you see this all the time. Now the big thing is avocados from Mexico. I keep hearing that. I'm like, okay, I don't care if the avocado. Why do I care if an avocado is from Mexico? I really don't care. But they keep making that big deal, right? So, I mean, we're Californians, And then I was sitting there talking to my dad's niece, my cousin, and her husband, and he was going on and on about the avocados in Florida. Oh, avocados in Florida. Okay, so, I mean, when it gets down to guacamole, who cares, right, what avocado you use to put in there, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look, and we say what occurs when there's only one provider. That's what? That's a monopoly, okay? A oligopoly, few sellers, where our oil companies, our cell phone makers, right? Cell phone providers, whatever. Okay. Oh, that's it? Okay, so just a couple, but you saw those different ones. Okay, let's talk about gross domestic product. Okay, gross domestic product. And this is the current term that is a broad measure of the health of a country economy, and it includes goods that are actually produced in the country. It includes goods that are actually produced in the country. We call that gross domestic product. We used to measure the health of the United States economy using something called gross, did I say gross national product? Okay, I said gross domestic product for that one up here, right? We used to use gross national product, and with gross national product only counted goods that were manufactured by U.S. companies regardless of what country they were manufactured in. So if a U.S. company produced a vehicle in Mexico, they would count that as part of the gross national product. Gross domestic product counts those items that are actually produced in the United States. So if you had a Mexican company producing goods inside of the United States, that would be counted as part of the what? Gross domestic product, right? So we're looking at the items that are actually produced within the borders of the United States when we talk about gross domestic product. Now, this is why you hear a lot from, and this is something that Bernie Sanders, you all heard of Bernie Sanders, who was running for president, for the Democratic nomination for president. He really started this, and then Trump kind of, well, Trump too, I'd say they both were sort of talking about it right at the beginning of their campaigns. They were talking about the issue of U.S. companies that are now having their items produced outside of the United States. And so if that happens, is that going to increase our gross domestic product or decrease it? It's going to decrease the gross domestic product because items that used to be made in the U.S. are now being made overseas. And I think Trump keeps talking about Carrier air conditioner that those were always produced inside the United States, and now they're going to be produced what? I think they're building a factory in Mexico where they're going to produce them there. And Trump keeps saying Carrier air conditioners doing this. And I thought it was kind of interesting that he kept saying that in a way to put pressure on Carrier not to move their plant to Mexico to keep the jobs in the United States. Why does that put pressure on Carrier if somebody like Trump keeps saying that over and over again? They're moving their plant down. They're moving their plant to Mexico. We should penalize them for that. And he keeps saying that. Does him articulating that put any pressure on Carrier? What's the first thing I did? Well, after a while when he kept saying it and it got into my head, right, because they have to compete it. So I don't know if it's the first thing I did, but what did I eventually do when I heard that? I I went outside and I looked to see who had manufactured the air conditioner that was on my house when I bought it, because I never bothered to look before. Carrier. Okay, so what happens if someone has to replace their air conditioner? I don't know, I'm saying this. Please, air conditioner, don't go out. If somebody has to replace their air conditioner, they may say, "Oh, I'm not going to buy the Carrier. I want to buy the one that is what? That is actually produced inside the United States, right?" Okay, so I think, and I'm not trying to push one candidate over the other. Um, but I'm not a. I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton. I'll just tell you, just so you know that I'm not trying to push Trump. Now, people are pushing Trump. Doesn't want me to. Huh? Price is cheap. The labor is cheaper. The labor is cheaper, and there's no real penalty to moving it outside. So now both Hillary and Trump, but I think Trump hit on it more, to be honest, if I'm going to be objective in this discussion. Now they're both saying it, and Bernie was also saying it as well. They're realizing that if you're going to do that, then there should be some sort of penalty associated with that. We're going to make you pay, higher fees to bring that back in, those products back into the United States, whatever. Huh? You lose jobs in the United States, the gross domestic product goes down, and as gross domestic product goes down, that's an indicator that the economy is performing poorly, right? Okay, and so that's why they're talking about doing that. Now, the other side of that discussion is that if the government steps in and says, okay, we're going to make you now pay more for your imports to bring that back in, that harms consumers, doesn't it? So it was always the Democrats that were making that argument. And it was always the Republicans that say, keep the government out of it. It's none of their business. They shouldn't come in and regulate that. Let the companies do what they want. But now, because they're seeing the effects, it's interesting that Trump has jumped on that issue, and he's now sort of, pushing the Republican Party in a different direction than where they've been before. So there seems to be pretty broad agreement that some of these, the way they handle trade nowadays, is affecting the gross domestic product. Okay, so we call that gross domestic product. And I just went ahead and pulled a slide off of the internet that has shown that, here recently we have had a downward tick in the GDP. And, you always hear they'll say, well, the GDP only grew 1.1% under Obama. They'll keep throwing that statistic out. Be careful when you hear that, because they're giving you one quarter usually. They're usually giving you the latest quarter, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think. They're saying U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, but I don't know. Maybe that's what they call them now. But anyway, they issued this information, quarterly? Okay, so when I got this one, wherever I got it from, I guess the last quarter had been through June. So what do we have? July, August, September. Yeah, so this is pretty much the latest, right, if they give it quarterly. And, it was 1.1 for that quarter. My brother-in-law is a Republican, and he's standing there. Well, the economy only grew 1.1% under Obama. And I'm like, that's for the last quarter, Bob. That's for the last quarter. His name is Bob. That's for the last quarter. Who do you think you're talking to? I worked for the federal government for 30 years. You're not going to fool me with that Rush Limbaugh stuff. Okay, so anyway, it's 1.1. But there have been some better quarters with growth compared to some of the other economies around the world during this time. The U.S. has actually performed better in that we've had positive GDP growth. A lot of countries have had negative GDP growth during the same time frame. So, okay. All right. Let's talk about economic indicators. And I really already sort of pointed towards one of them. The CPI is the Consumer Price Index. Okay. And when we talk about the Consumer Price Index, we talk about a basket of goods that consumers would use. For example, households would use transportation. Hey, You're consuming education right now, right? Education. What else? Housing, foods and beverages. Oh, housing's a pretty big chunk of that, isn't it? Must be the Bay Area pushing that one up, right? Okay. So what happens? You have all of these different things, and this is what consumers would purchase. And when we measure changes in the price levels, we typically talk about the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Okay. And if we see this Consumer Price Index going up, that is called inflation. That is called inflation. Now, inflation has been pretty much under control since about 1980. Prior to that, guys, inflation was outrageous. I mean, we would have 20% inflation in a given year. Okay, so that's pretty bad, right, if you have that much inflation. Since about 1980, it has stabilized. It usually is around 2-3% a year. There's always some level of inflation, but it's driven by the change in prices of these consumer goods that you see up here. Housing being the big one, right? In fact, the 2008 financial crisis, which was sort of ushered in by the housing problems, okay, I'm of the opinion was brought on by the Federal Reserve Bank, and that was when Alan Greenspan was the chairman, trying to slow down inflation by bringing down the prices of houses. Guys, in this class, cell phones, I'm going to start to say are not allowed, okay? So from now on, just don't even have your cell phone out if we're not going to be able to control ourselves, okay, with the cell phone, okay? So it's up to you guys. I mean, I want to treat you like adults and let you have your phone sitting there in case, there's an emergency or you want to glance at a quick message from your mom saying, she's out of the hospital or something, but if it's going to be one of these things, I'm going to have to say just don't bring them anymore, okay? Or you can bring them but keep them in your pocket or whatever. Okay? So let's keep it real, okay? Anyway, what's going to happen here? When we had the housing crisis, I think that was the Federal Reserve Banks trying to control inflation because the housing market was going wild, driving up the consumer price index, right? And so what they did was they raised interest rates. If you raise interest rates, that's going to bring the price of homes down because people can't afford an expensive house and high interest rates. And when he did that, because it collapsed the housing market, that had a ripple effect, a terrible ripple effect, if that's oxymoronic, but a ripple effect throughout the housing market and eventually the economy. Okay, so that's called Consumer Price Index. And as I was mentioning earlier, the way they used to do this, or the way the government was thinking about changing this, is they didn't include, say, replacement goods. So if the price of soda is going up on the market, what's going to happen? They're going to say, well, if price of soda is going up on the market, you'll replace that with tap water, right? And you'll just get water. You'll just drink water instead at some level. And when they include that, that then brings the consumer price index down. And the government was talking about doing this. Obama was talking about, his administration was talking about doing this to keep what? The growth in the amount of Social Security and some of those things down. The idea being that what? If we keep those things, the price of those things down, we can control the federal budget a little bit better, right? And some folks were saying, no, that's not appropriate. You shouldn't keep Social Security benefits, the price of those down. You're not keeping up with the cost of living, etc. Okay, now purchase price index. Okay, let me do a couple of these terms. Obviously, if prices go down, that's going to be what? Is that disinflation or deflation? If prices go down, prices go down, that's deflation. So then, what's disinflation? What's disinflation? Disinflation is the slowing down of the rate of inflation. So if inflation was 2% in year one, 2% increase in year 1, and then it's a what? 1% increase in year 2, we still have inflation because it's still increasing, but the rate of increase has slowed down, hasn't it? So they call that disinflation. If we're sitting here and we have an actual reduction in the price levels, then that's considered deflation. Okay, and then we have the purchase price index. Purchase price index is what producers pay for the raw materials that they use to then make the products that go into the consumer price index. So I don't know, the price of lumber. We don't count lumber as part of the consumer index because what? That's included, that we're getting that through housing, aren't we? Okay, but we would count as part of the producer price index, or excuse me, the purchase price index, we would include lumber because that's the raw material that goes into building the house, right? Okay. So which one do you think is going to be a more leading indicator of inflation? Consumer price or purchaser price? Huh? What's going to be more of a leading indicator of inflation? Consumer or purchaser price index? Purchaser price. Good. If the price of lumber is going up, eventually we're going to see the price of homes go up, aren't they? Okay. Okay, good. And that connection is getting closer and closer. There's not as much of a lag in there as there used to be. Okay. Okay, good. Unemployment. Unemployment. And we have different types of unemployment. Okay. We have frictional unemployment. What's friction? Is this friction? You rub your hands together, that's friction, isn't it? Okay, so frictional unemployment is the unemployment that's caused by people moving from one job to the next, right? Hey, I'm sitting here and I'm going to be unemployed for a month because I moved from job 1 to job 2, but job 2 told me that I can't start until September 1st, and job 1 told me, well, if you're leaving, please leave now. I have frictional unemployment for that month, whatever, right? If I'm leaving September 1st and I can't start until, October 1st or whatever, that's considered frictional unemployment. So I move from one job to the next, okay? Structural unemployment, what happens here? I used to be in the business of making CDs. Am I in that business anymore? Well, there might be a few people left, those guys that sold me that thing for my computer. But for the most part, CD manufacturers or people that focus in that industry would be out of business, wouldn't they? Structural unemployment, if you're a yellow cab driver, are you going to start to maybe see some structural unemployment around that? Right now, everybody's like, well, wait a minute. Why would I go through this licensed taxi driver when I could go through Uber or something like that, right? Okay, so you'll probably start to see some structural unemployment there. Cyclical unemployment is, and we're going to look at the business cycle here in a second, cyclical cycle. As the economy starts to go through a cycle of a downward trend, obviously more people are unemployed, right? Okay, and then you have what? Seasonal unemployment. Christmas tree lot worker suffers a lot of seasonal unemployment because what? They're only working during, now they probably would do other things, but at least for that particular skill of Christmas tree seller, that's only during the holiday season, right? I was on an assignment one time with my office. Remember, I mentioned that I worked for the federal government for almost 30 years, an agency called the Government Accountability Office, GAO, and we do whatever Congress essentially tells us to do. And there was an issue. What the federal government does, when you file your tax return, if you owe money, you have to write them a check, don't you? Okay, so imagine they get all kinds of checks coming in that are supposed to go into the federal government's bank account. What the federal government does is they use a lockbox system, and with the lockbox system, those checks go to a particular facility that is run by a commercial bank, for example, Bank of America. is one of the banks that you will send your check, and if you pay your taxes, I'll bet you the address that it's going to go to is San Francisco. They take the check the check goes to San Francisco, the P.O. box there, and then it gets on a truck and it goes south on 101 across the San Mateo Bridge into the greatest city in the world. What's the greatest city in the world on the other side of the San Mateo Bridge? Hayward, California, where I'm from. That's why I said the greatest city in the world. It ends up in Hayward, where they have a lockbox facility there, and that's a Bank of America facility, that one, where they sit there and they process all those checks. They scan them. They're fiber optic checks, etc. They scan them, and that's how the check isn't fiber optics, but they use fiber optics to scan the checks, and that's how they get, and they scan on the number. Even though when you write a check, the written amount is the legal amount, they scan on the number because they have a higher batting average, and that's how they update all of the government's bank accounts, et cetera, as those checks then get deposited. Well, what happened was, and it wasn't Bank of America, but some of the banks that were running those lock boxes, that were providing that lockbox service, were not able to keep up with the quota of checks that the federal government, IRS, has said they have to process to maintain that position as a lockbox. And so rather than just say, hey, we can't keep up, they just shredded the checks. They would shred the tax return in the check so that when the IRS came in to look, they'd say, oh, okay, we don't have a bunch of unprocessed returns, so you're keeping up with your quota, and they were shredding them. Is Congress too happy when checks that are headed to the Treasury get shredded? They didn't think that was too funny, right? This was money headed to the government's bank account that was getting shredded. So they asked my office to go in and look at it and see if we have recommendations about the operations of the lockbox. Well, when we first walked in there, it was like the beginning of April, end of March or so, and the place was empty. It was a huge place, empty. And I'm like, well, I've got a recommendation. They don't need this much space to do this. What do you think was happening closer to April 15th? Closer to April 15th, the place was full of individuals opening the returns, scanning them. We asked them, well, where'd all these people come from? They say, these are seasonal workers. They come in and they work during this time of the season to go ahead and process that. Okay, now I'm going to recommend that if you can't stay awake, it's probably not a bad idea to drop this class, okay, because I just don't want to sit here and deal with somebody who's just going to sleep for the whole class. So if you think that this is too early of a class for you, I'm sure they'll offer another section in the afternoon or something that you can take, or maybe with a different teacher or something. Okay, so what happens? That's an example of seasonal employment in which during that particular time of year, that's when you get that work. When that season is over, you're not going to be employed, right? That's seasonal unemployment. Which of these do you think the government can do something about? How about frictional? They probably can't do anything about it. They probably don't care because that person's heading for another job, right? How about structural unemployment? Well, they care. They care. And this is something that is more difficult for them to do something about. But job training opportunities, funding education, that sort of thing would help with structural unemployment. So that if I lost my job as a CD maker, well, now you can train me to be a cloud maintainer, I don't know, whatever it is that I would do instead of producing CDs, right? Okay, so, but there's more a time lag in their ability to do something about that. The cab companies are? Yeah, I would think. So through regulation, you're saying there's something that they might be able to do with the structural. Yeah, but these things take longer, don't they? Okay. With the cyclical unemployment, we're going to see that that's the one that the government focuses on, either through fiscal policy or through monetary policy to try to stimulate the economy. As the economy comes back up, then we will be on the upside of the cycle and we'll have less cyclical unemployment, right? How about seasonal unemployment? What are they going to do? Okay, let's move Christmas to May so that Christmas tree workers, there's not a whole lot that they can do about that. But the one that they really focus on is cyclical, and then they try to do something a little bit about structural. Now you also have the discussion that there are some people that just check out of the economy. They're not counted in any of these unemployment numbers. They're not counting the unemployment numbers. Once an individual gives up looking for work, then they don't count them. So a homeless person, they are none of the above. They are not considered, well, I mean, I guess a homeless person could theoretically have a job, but assuming they don't have a job, and I'm just saying somebody that's pretty much destitute, right? They are not counted in any of these categories when they're not working. Okay? All right, so let's just go ahead and take a look at the measurement of quantity of goods and services is what we call productivity. And we want to see if we can provide less resources and still produce the same amount of goods. That's considered productivity. And obviously this is important because the more productive we are, the faster the growth in the economy, right? Okay. So you come over, and this is the business cycle, and we have a peak. We have a peak here, and then we go into recession, and then we see that we have a trough. That's the low point here, and then we start to go into recovery/expansion. Recovery/expansion. Okay, there it is, right there. They put the word expansion there. Recovery/expansion, and then we have another peak. Here comes another recession, right? And you could tie these probably back to our discussion of supply and demand for various items that make up the economy as we're trying to find that place where we reach market equilibrium. That's going to be during the expansion recovery. We find that market equilibrium. Now what? Now we have reached the peak. Now we're going to start to see that there's going to be some maybe frictional unemployment as people move out of that area that was a hot area of growth before, and so we start to have a recession. If we have that frictional unemployment, new products come up, new opportunities come up, we move to what? We move to a recovery, etc., right? And the idea is to have the economy grow, and trust me guys, this nice straight line of growth is a dream, right? You don't have that. You're going to have, if you were to look at this over a period of years, in the U.S., you have seen growth, but it's not this straight line. There's a lot of peaks and valleys in there, right? But over time, it would hopefully grow, and it has. It has. Do you think the economy has grown? You think the economy has grown? It really has. It really has. You look at, Say it again. From Clinton to now, you drive through some areas like in the Hayward Hills and some of that area, Fremont Hills, some of those areas. I mean, all you see, as far as you can see now, is houses where there used to be cows, right? And so there's been significant growth, I think, in the economy over these years. Okay. Okay, good. Let's look at some questions then about our economics. Okay. And we say that what is an economic indicator? It is a aspect of the economy that can be measured in order to determine a country's overall economic health. Those things that we talked about, gross domestic product, talking about consumer price index, all of these things are going to be considered economic indicators. The unemployment rate, all of that. Okay? All right, good. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at this question. And what is it? Army Lisa, a popular U.S.-based brand. Is that true? Of handbags, or that's made up? Okay. It has built a second factory in Mexico. The majority of the new factory employees are Mexican citizens or Honduran immigrants. On which country's gross domestic product will that be counted? It's going to be what? Mexico, right? Mexico. because it's being made there. That part about that the employees are Mexican citizens or Honduran immigrants is irrelevant. That's a distractor. That has nothing to do with it. It's the fact that it was made what? It was made outside of the U.S., right? Okay. Okay, good. How about this one? A downward moving GDP indicates that fewer goods and services are being produced inside of the United States. That is the definition of GDP, isn't it? Okay. Okay, good. A rise in the general level of prices over time is called inflation. If you're wondering what's that big gap all about, it's just because it spilled onto the second page. Don't forget, guys, that these same questions, for the most part, are appearing in your quiz for Chapter 2. And all you have to do is clean out the answers and then look back at this like it's the actual quiz, and you can practice, like it's your midterm or whatever. Okay, so that's why I keep them in the Word file like that. A something blank is a decrease in the rate of inflation. That's what? That's disinflation, not deflation, right? Okay. Okay, good. What does the monthly consumer price index measure? And it's the change in prices of goods and services purchased by what? By households, by consumers. That's the consumer price index. It's the cost of housing, isn't it? Food, that kind of stuff. Okay. Now you come over, and goods tracked by the PPI, the what? Producer price index, are the raw materials and finished goods sold to retailers, right? The houses, the shirts that Nordstrom sells, right? That Nordstrom buys, I should say, from the producer are going to be part of the producer price index. Okay. Blank unemployment measures those that are out of work during the off season. This question's like, can you read, right? If it's during the off season, that is what? Seasonal unemployment. Blank unemployment measures unemployment caused by the lack of demand for those who want to work. That's what? That's cyclical. As we start to see the economy come down, then that's going to be called cyclical unemployment. I was listening to the radio the other day, and maybe I need to stop listening to sports talk stations, because I heard someone say, well, you can't predict the economy. You just, you can't track it. And I'm like, yes, you can. It's cyclical. What happens with the unemployment is a cyclical thing. You can kind of look at these economic indicators that we're talking about, and as you start to see some of them trail off, you can start to predict what's going to happen with employment levels, right? Okay. Okay, good. How about this one? Frictional unemployment is what? Temporary, as workers move from one job to the next. Okay. So just going over some of our definitions here. Okay. Blank unemployment measures permanent unemployment. Permanent unemployment because of what? Massive industry-wide changes. That's the structural unemployment. Which of these do you think the government's going to try to control the most, or has the ability? I mean, I'm sure if they could, they'd try to control all of them. But which one do they tend to focus on? The cyclical unemployment. Okay. So what we're going to do when we come back next week, okay, we're going to continue on with Chapter 2. We get out at 10:30, right? So we're going to continue on with Chapter 2, and we're going to pick it up then at this discussion. We'll talk about fiscal policy. We'll talk about monetary policy. To finish this chapter up, we will get into Chapter 3, talking about ethical business behavior. And with some luck, we may even crack into Chapter 4, because that ethical chapter should go a little more quickly for us, a little more straightforward stuff for us, okay? So be looking on Canvas for Chapter 4 towards the end of this week, beginning of next week. Chapter 3 is already up there, so you can get that stuff and be ready for class next time. And obviously Chapter 2 is up there as well if you haven't brought that. Actually, I'm glad I said that, guys. I'm not quite seeing Although this looks pretty good, these flashcards, making flashcards. But I'm not quite seeing the point of bringing a notebook that then you're going to have to go back and try to tie the notebook up to the slides. So you might want to start somehow bringing the slides. I think your notes are going to be better for you if you just put them on the slides. And you can print, if you don't know how, just ask me. I'll show you how to print the slides with speaker notes. I don't know if you know how to do that, where it gives you 3 slides per page, or I like 2 slides per page myself, but if you want to do 3 per page with the little lines for the speaker notes on the side, you can do that. But I think you should be taking your notes on the slides themselves, although I like this flashcard thing. But not only because of the idea that you can go ahead and just put the notes right there on the slide, that's obvious. But you have on Canvas, you're going to have the slides, you're going to have the quiz, and then you're going to have this recorded lecture that I'm doing right now. So you could always go back. You don't have to sit there and watch, well, John, I'm just here with you for 90 minutes. I got to do it again. No, but you could go back and say, what was he saying about cyclical unemployment? How did that work again? And you can just go right to that part, and you can figure it out by the slide image that's going to be there and figure out and rewatch that if you want to. So I think the slides are the way you ought to be trying to track what we're doing here. Okay? All right, guys, have a good rest of the week, and we will see you on next week, all right? How you doing?